Okay, hi guys. This is going to be another check-in, as well as several subjects as they may occur to me in in the telling. I hope I will make it to the other end without too much blubbering or too much emotional upheaval here. I have got out a whole collection of grounding crystals, and I'm wearing a smoky quartz, so that should help. The thing that came to my mind on my little walk just now for grounding in the circumstance that I'm in at the moment, which I will elaborate on in just a bit, was obsidian. I've got a really pretty obsidian wand that has, which you won't be able to see, translucent areas in it. Some parts of it are mahogany obsidian, like this red type. Maybe you'll be able to make out, see that? And the grayer translucent areas will be Apache tear, of which I also have one of these. So I've got a couple more here. I've got another really pretty larger smoky quartz crystal, like so. That's all covered in some other type of white fine dust, and it has greenish tints crystals as well. I'm actually finding that I bought this crystal maybe 2 years ago or so, and then at that time I was interested in the description of the qualities that the gemstone has, and I didn't really find that I related to it in any particular way. But now I guess I am getting to that level, to that point. I also have here a snowflake obsidian, like so. I thought I might just as well start off my story today with, showing you some of my stones here. Also because I found that for the situation that I'm in, the more transparent, translucent types of obsidian, like the Apache tear, were easier to access for me. So I had an instant sort of a connection to those two parts of the display here, as well as to not so much this one as this larger crystal here. So whereas the snowflake obsidian is so much denser, and it feels like it is a lot slower in vibration, and I still also need it, but I'm not so much aware of its effect immediately because my state, I need grounding, okay? So my state is right up here. I am still, I guess, not so much distressed anymore. I was distressed yesterday, and because of the things that I will be describing to you in a bit, don't worry, there hasn't been any, like big events other than psychological realizations again. So big deal. Yes, very big deal, but not like my house was on fire or anything like that at all. It's just that at the moment I'm still dealing with some of the toxins. I guess I did sleep quite well. I had a nice dinner, so did husband, so everything is really basically under control, and it is only a matter of me getting back down to comfortable parameters again, which is what I want, because yokes, I don't, it takes time. And that's what the obsidian basically does. It allows me time. It gives me this grounding sensation where all of a sudden I don't have to do this right away. I don't have to do this in this way or in this way. I can do it in any old way that feels okay for me. And then we see what happens, okay? That's just how it's going to be for now. So there's lots of more grounding type stones that you can use. It's really, I find this absolutely amazing to have this collection and to be able to also sort of put away all my beautiful pink and orange calcites that I've used all the summer long. Even my garnets and my topaz and all that, I have stored away for now. I can always take them back out again really easily, but I have been working on my emotional strength so much that it's in a bit of a bit of a tremble in here, you know. I feel almost like I am like this. I am trembling inside. You don't see that, but it's I find it very annoying. It's normal for me, but I can also be normal at a slightly lesser level of excitement. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to do here, also by talking to you guys and by putting my whole operation into words again, which I will get to next. I even have notes that husband wrote down for me, a few, um, to help me along, because what I'm going to try and get at here is how fields or vibrations or effects from concepts that are still very abstract to our perception nowadays may well be affecting our lives and may well have affected our lives all the time, always. So the abstract, what looks like abstract because we don't know enough about it yet, subjects that have come to the surface in fairly recent years, like the vanished twin syndrome and soul loss. Those two, really. I have been talking about those two subjects to you often already. I've made a playlist recently about soul retrieval, past lives items and episodes. I will also make a playlist about the vanished twin syndrome subjects, because I think that they don't get talked about hardly at all. Certainly not in the wider world out there. There's people, but very little of it is really about personal experiences. So that's where I get into the thick of things right here. We were in the woods yesterday. We had all sorts of discussions. We'd had a fairly busy Saturday, and yesterday was Sunday. So we went off to the woods to have a bit of air and a bit of green around us, and also to talk about the things that are important to us. And as we went along, somehow the conversation got deeper and deeper into the past, into our past, and to illustrate what it is that I'm going to talk about as to, all this soul business, which really the lost twin is also about soul, at least in my interpretation. I will have to take you along into our past as well. So that's what I'm planning to do. Where to start? Because of course my husband and I both had our lives as young people before we met. Okay, we met and got together in Amsterdam in 1986. At that time I was 21, my husband was 27, give or take a birthday. Doesn't matter. Okay, I think that's correct though. In 86 I will have been 20 even. So I was even just that tiny bit younger. Both our backgrounds, from the viewpoint of how does a person grow up, how do you learn things, what do you learn, whether you get the chance to learn things in your own time, whether you get a bit of attention from people, from teachers and parents, not necessarily in that order, had been really dramatic and really scary in many respects. My life had been scary and his life had been scary already. And the overwhelming sense that we both had when we got together when we decided to, how do you say that? Be a couple, be together. The overwhelming sense was one of sort of recognition and acknowledgement of finding a person out there who actually had been through the same idiotic frenzy for larger parts of our lives as us. So both of us had that sensation, that notion. Some of it was conscious and a lot of it was at that point still very unconscious. And what it felt like was we were both pieces of driftwood, just cast on the shore somewhere together. So our relationship really was built and based on that. It was founded on actually driftwood, would you call that sinking sand type substance, the utter lack of substance. It was founded on loss. It was founded on distress. And we found also, because our birth charts are really very compatible in many ways, not in every way, but in quite a number of ways, we found a lot of comfort also physically in each other. So, and it's still that way. When the other person is nearby, in the same room preferably, that's what when we feel happiest. And we can still each do our own thing, but we tend to be rather clingy compared to what people, especially in this country of ours, tend to think of as normal. We prefer to always sit on the couch close together. We don't keep really a lot of personal space between us or distance between us. We don't like distance between us at all, neither of us. So we are really quite similar in that respect also. God, this is hard to share. For some reason, this is another thing that I just feel like it's got to be shared, so whatever, let's just blaze along. I will be lighting more sticks of incense because this is nice. I'm burning a frankincense, fairly sweet type incense the whole time. That just will, maybe you can see some smoke passing by here, through here sometimes. So that was the basis. Then for a few years after that, we got married fairly quickly, the same year actually in 87. So we hooked up. We met in 86 and we hooked up in January 87 and we got married in September 87. And my mother didn't want to show up for my wedding, which I didn't like at all. However, at the time, I was still in complete full soul loss mode. I had no clue what to do about anything. I was really passive. I was a real chameleon, like I've described last week in another one of my check-in videos, I think. I was just not capable of minding even. It's just, I accepted whatever anybody said. Anything was okay with me. I had no resistance. I had no want or desire to disagree with any of it. All I could do was keep my head down and survive. And basically that's what my husband used to do also. So it was like that. Then after that, I was still a student. I think in the beginning he was also still a student. He finished his studies in English literature a year or two after that. Maybe the same year, I'm not even sure. And so did I a couple of years later. I did take a sort of a year leave out of my studies because you were only allowed to study to be enrolled in the university in Amsterdam for 6 years. So I knew that I wasn't going to make that happen and all the changes and all of it. So of course I moved house. I moved to his place. We didn't have much room. We had 2 cats and it was a mess and all that. So all the whole householding thing was just like a complete mystery to me because my mother was an invalid. So I had never really learned all that many of the housewifely skills, so to speak. And it took a bit of inventing. However, there was also a lot of fun I had a huge amounts of fun, strolling over the markets with my newfound husband. And in the end, I go back to my studies, and I've managed to, I suppose, graduate. I don't know what you would call that. It's a different system. And I wrote a paper, an end paper for my studies, and that was that. And by then, we'd already moved out of Amsterdam. But the situation was more or less still in for us, for ourselves. It was still more or less the same. This driftwood type situation. I think that's a really good image, and I used to realize that. And because Amsterdam is like half an hour's drive away from the beach, we used to, and we did not have a car because not in Amsterdam, and there's no point. But you can take the train easily enough, and then in half an hour's time you are actually on the beach of the North Sea, which is like one straight line of sand going from south to north in one fell swoop like that. And the North Sea tends to be rather grey, and the sand is kind of sand coloured, and there is sometimes driftwood to be found. And I remember we found, I don't know what you call those, like a ladder, a step ladder that is for an old ship, for a wooden ship that had wooden rungs like that and rope going down. And we took that home with us in a bin liner. And that's the type of I used to collect lots of driftwood. I thought it was amazing. So afterwards, after a few years in Amsterdam, we moved to the countryside, actually fairly close to where I live now, in a town about 7 kilometers or so away from here. So that's like 5 miles or so eastward from here, where we actually managed to rent a larger house, immense to our perception. And by that time, my mother also was still alive. So this is like around 91 that I'm talking about by now. And at the time that I moved over to my husband's house, when I married, just before I married him, my mother came from France and moved in with her father, where I had been staying, with whom I had been staying, in the East old-fashioned part of Amsterdam. So that's how that went. My mother came a lot closer to me as soon as I got married, and that was more pressure for me and less freedom. So it meant doing a lot of shopping for her, because her being, physically rather incapacitated. I have never really been able to figure out what her physical ailment exactly may have been or may not have been. I know that she had a terrible past as well, and she had so many bad memories of people also in her own family, and she wasn't. I'm not sure whether I should say that she wasn't abused. It just depends how you look at things. It wasn't like an extreme case of abuse necessarily, but it was certainly an extreme case of neglect. So it was never easy for her. And I've always accepted her state of affairs, her, her way of looking at things. And I actually still do, even though I'd had to kind of come full circle. And there have been moments, of course, where I just couldn't cope with her anymore. And it wasn't easy. It was never easy. And she was a Taurus and I'm a Leo. And we had really very different approaches to life. And thank God for astrology, because that's when, actually, in the period when I just gotten married to my husband, we met somebody else who introduced me to astrology. So from then on, it was like my brain opened out, like, okay, so I do not have to be this identical same copy of the same values and the same ideas as my mother believes in and follows. So, long story short, we lived in the village over there, okay, for in a total of 18 years in 3 different locations. And there's actually quite a bit of a shift in perspective happening on the surface. And that's what we were talking about yesterday. So I'm going to get back to yesterday and what we were talking about, and what kind of really hit me, which is why I am still a bit in a state of confusion here, land of confusion, because it was also the end of the 80s. There was a lot of fatalistic, that's how you say that, right? Worldview in our direct surroundings. There had been for a long time. I think my husband certainly carried a lot of that with him because he was 6 years older than me. And I've always felt that I had to fight a certain level of fatalism and a certain level of there's nothing that you can do about this. It's just the state of affairs. You know, it's just the way the world is, and you just have to make do as best you can and stay out of the line of fire. That type of approach, that type of worldview. Somehow I have personally always consciously, so in my awareness, I've always tried to fight those ideas. And because that wasn't how I was brought up, my mother and her father had both been in Indonesia in concentration camps with the rest of their family, and they were to some extent they were fighters. And I've referred to Esther Perel's videos recently and her work also, even though most of what she does nowadays is about all sorts of different subjects, but there isn't really all that much about second and third generation World War victims, you know, like people who grow up with victims, what that is like. And that's a whole new series of dismal tales there, and a whole new playlist, I guess. But she distinguishes the people who just didn't die from the people who chose to really live after the war. And I think that my grandparents and my parents, all of them, were mentally and intellectually on the side of those who chose to live. At least that was what they pretended to themselves. So there's a deeper layer to that even, because to a large extent they didn't really make it. They were just not, to some extent they were dead inside, really. And of course I can, sit here flippantly equate that with some type of soul loss again and what have you. And I don't think there's really much of a point to that at this moment. What I'm going for here is the psychological patterns, really. What happens is that you can grow up with people and pretend that you're a fighter endlessly. Pretend that you know things, which was certainly my MO, because, I loved reading. I was always proud, I suppose, of my capacity to understand almost anything that was thrown at me. When I was an adolescent, I used to read, I remember that I still got the booklet of Einstein's relativity theory, his own publication, for one of the first publications about the theory. And I loved that. I was very much into science and physics and mathematics and all that, if you can believe it, when I was 16 years old. Although by that time, between 14 and 16, I was very much into that. And afterwards, I sort of started to feel that if I wanted to do any kind of studying, I would have to shift over more to the languages side and maybe a literary type side, because it was easier and I could get it done more easily, and I could still be this, because I wanted to be a humanist. I wanted to have access to everything, basically. So that was my sort of approach. Also studying, in the beginning of my studies, that's what I was, basically how I went about things. I was very, very much an intellectual. And My husband, not so much. He was, I think, also very much a fighter. I think he was much more really a fighter than I was. And there was less of this hidden fatalism. Okay, I'm using the same word again. But it looks to me now, from where I am today, 2019, I'm looking at these things, it looks like layer upon layer. It's almost like, I don't know what type of stone does that. There's like fluorite, for example. I haven't got an example right here in front of me, but there's types of fluorite that make layers, bands of color, or agate even. You could say agate, but then a type where you would have transparent and opaque layers, one after the other, in one after the other, like so. So each time there's a layer of the one type of thing and the layer of the other type. So a layer of hidden fatalism and a layer of courage, and a layer that says, I don't care. I never mind. Let's just get a move on. Let's just go and create something new, or anything of the sort. Those two types of mood are all over us, always, I think, especially if you've been through a lot. So, I remember in the first house in the other village, it was a really big house, the same size as this one, more or less. In the beginning, the first couple of months or so, we used to traipse around the house together because it felt we were used to having these teeny tiny rooms that we had in Amsterdam, which was like, I don't know, 25 square meters or something. It was really tiny. It was less. The whole apartment that he used to have in Amsterdam was less than this ground floor that I have now, even excluding the, outer shed part, whatever you call that. It was tiny, and we were so used to being sitting in, scrunched together, that whenever one went to another room to do whatever, the other one would tag along, because it was just like magnetic. You just traipse along and there you were. And after a while we noticed this, of course, and it felt like, okay, we can actually use this space and sort of start to, well, after a while then I had to go often to Amsterdam, which is all in all, using public transports only, it was a 3-hour commute from door to door, from my house to my grandpa's house where my mom was staying. And then I had to do all sorts of, chores, shopping, cooking, massage, and general therapeutic feedback, talking person, listener, and all that for her. And at some point I was getting really, I suppose, fed up with it. And it was very unidimensional. And I still had also the large problem that my mother was an authoritarian woman, because she was brought up in an authoritarian context. And her father was the same. So her being there and not having, ever resolved any of her problems with her father either, it must have been extremely uncomfortable for both of them. I was getting fed up. I was hearing also other people, talking about freedom and autonomy, I guess. And I just couldn't. So I felt like you have to find somebody else to do your shopping for you. I can't always come over and, well, that's also the period where I started to clean up my own house. We had several cats the whole time, and it was a horrible mess, and you do not want to think of the way the house looked at that time. And I felt really miserable about it, and I started just sort of also trying to get, for the first time, get a grip on my stuff, which was a huge deal to me. So, and on the other hand, also I started doing volunteer work. I'd finished my studies a while before, and I hadn't really any chance of, finding work or anything. It wasn't on my mind, and I couldn't, because basically of my mother. Really, it's not nice to sort of put that whole responsibility on her then, but it's the way it was. I just didn't have the brain space. And I also felt, I think now looking in hindsight, that my husband, who was looking for translating work back at that time, he then did a sort of a new training to go into administration, to go into bookkeeping, that he needed me to be at home more than was completely obvious or conscious for either of us. So those were really difficult times. I tried to get my mother to find somebody else to help look after the house, to help, because, you know, that's one of the Second World War, second, third generation type traits, is that you have a really huge Berlin Wall size, okay, resistance to getting help from outside. Even if there are an X number of organizations, and nowadays in, you know, this 21st century, there isn't really all that much money left for that type of humanitarian, I don't know what you call that, aid in society, you know, helping, I'd have to look that up really, what that's called. But there's all sorts of, there used to be all sorts of places you could go to for help, for, you know, somebody to do your shopping for you, somebody to help with whatever, you know what I mean, anyway. But they didn't want that. My grandpa didn't want it, my mother didn't really want it, so I took a great deal of talking and convincing on my side, and plus the fact that it took me 3 hours each ride to just get to their door, and then I hadn't even done anything yet. So I then came to some sort of an agreement with them that if I came every 2 weeks for a weekend, for a whole weekend, I'd stay two nights, I think, then they would sort out some of their shit on their end, okay? And then also I would be able to develop some sort of a life of my own. And that's when I started doing volunteer work at our local fair trade shop and in that village. It's all long gone now. I had actually a whale of a time at the fair trade shop, because those were people who were interested in all sorts of other things. And I found for 7 whole years, that I could actually contribute to some type of thing outside of myself, to something outside of my link with my mother or my link with my husband. My mother never really accepted my husband as a part of my life anyway. Let's just not go there. She wasn't really in his face that much. She just didn't connect with him, and he was way too much of an autonomous and, you know, like I said, a type of a fighter to accept all her opinions at face value and just lie down on the floor and take it, which that's not his style at all. I think he was kind to her, and she tried to be kind to him as well. So that was quite as good as it was able to get in those times. Then, all that, I had to describe all that for you to get a bit of a sense of where it is that we're coming from here. Fast forward, okay? Looking for work, my husband looking for work, my grandfather and my mother passing away in 95, us moving house all in the same year. 95 was the craziest year to date, incredible. And trying, because that's what everybody's talking to you about, get a show on the road, you know, work-wise, income-wise, get the thing working, and we failed. Basically, that's what happened. We just couldn't really make it happen. And the crazy thing about having a hole in your soul is that you don't see it. And that's really crucial to my story here, because the hole in your soul is what I think that we are getting at when we are talking about things that are hard to measure, hard to make tangible, things that seem to remain abstract for so long. And I think the tarot is a wonderful tool nowadays for me to get a handle on these things. Time for some hydration here. I pulled cards yesterday for this sort of this sequence or the components of like this layer, the fatalistic and the positivistic, courageous parts of us. And what I got, I just got 3 cards here, and they are in the Pagan Cats, 5 Pentacles, 3 of Cups, 5 of Cups. Is it 3 of Cups? Let me check that out. Yes, it is. So, that's what it was like in that whole process. There were layers of isolation on both of our sides. I could go into my husband's life in much more detail. Parents divorced, his mother remarried to a man who had 8 children from a previous marriage. And of those 8 children, a number of them, I have no idea, at least half of them, were on hard drugs for a while, at least, or they had other big problems. And so the household had become extremely chaotic and nervous and unpredictable, and even scary and simply dangerous for him. Well, he got into this situation when he was 14 years old, I believe, between 12 and 14. And it wasn't like instantly the whole lot of them came over. So there is a lot of 5 Pentacles energy in that situation. Being different, feeling completely misunderstood, feeling like nobody, you don't belong to any of those people, right? Then again, also between my husband and I, there's always been this intense 3 of Cups energy of sharing and also having a lot of fun together, going on holidays, enjoying life in general together. And then beyond that, there's this sense of loss, this deep sense of inexplicable confrontation with pain that you don't really know where it is coming from. You have plenty of reasons, but none of those is really it. And that's one really good indication that there's more going on. And that's why I'm also making this lengthy video again, because there is always more going on. And expansion of consciousness means making room in your mental approach of life, in your intellectual approach of life, for the unknown factors, because there's plenty of those. So a lot of the isolation, a lot of the 5 of Pentacles energy was also between us, even though we did have this friendship, this sense of being in it together, clinging to each other. And this is where I'm going to go over to the vanished twin, or lost twin as I prefer to call it, effect. Let me call it the lost twin effect for now, okay? Because I have always felt that the connection that we had and the way we managed to actually work together, that depends on whether the layers that you have in the transparent bits, okay? Let's assume that the transparent bits are the courageous bits in you. These, in a relationship between 2 people, have to correlate or link up somehow. Then, if that happens, you can work together, whether it is at home or in a business or any of it. And I have always felt that my positivistic, my courageous bits didn't link up with his, ever. I think that makes a lot of sense, actually, saying that. I'm just sort of rolling this out here. I didn't know that this was coming. But that actually makes a ton of sense. I'm going to sort of pause for 1 second, have more tea, and then read my husband's notes here to see whether I can distill any more from that, okay? Yes, okay. So, the thing with the lost twin effect is that in my, as I have seen it in recent years, and the way my husband looks at his life, and the way, especially deeper and on deeper and more subconscious levels, the things I'm thinking, the subconscious, that's basically this. It's basically all these contracts and things that have happened to you, and huge energy vibration effects and moments that happen to us that have had a huge impact on our emotions, on our thoughts, on our habits, and we don't see it. We don't ourselves, of course, see it, and that's why it's subconscious, because most of it is simply too painful. And as to the origin of the pain, I think the origin of the pain isn't the loss of the twin, and I'm talking about two people being born in the same womb, okay? Just ordinary, basically ordinary physical twins, or even triplets or quadruplets, because that's also a given story there. The thing is, that is a source of immense joy. And it is the loss of that joy that hits those people so hard. So hard that everything else in their life, none of it comes close, ever. And there is going to be a wall of isolation and anger petrified within them. And there's going to be a complete lack of value in their lives. That's what I have seen. There is the impossibility to see value in physical life. But it all hinges around the fact that being conceived in your mother's womb, in a body so close really to the soul, together with one or more others in that same situation, I believe, whose origin is a different soul. But there is another soul present at the moment of your conception. That is massive. That is like, that's pure religion. Now you're talking religion here. This is religion, as I'm always reminded of it. The word is from the Latin religere, meaning to link up, to connect. So this is basically, I think, where we all come from, one way or another, whether we're born alone or conceived, I should say, alone or not. It's a fundamental part of human awareness, of human consciousness, is a pattern surrounding connection inside us. So this is all very theoretical, very abstract. Here I am again with my nice, pretty, shiny theories around joy. And then life on the planet as a semi-adult, or as an adult, or even a grown-up and beyond that, is going to be about value. Whether we are capable of seeing value and worth in what we do ourselves, how we engage with things, depends immensely on the value that I can find. Now, for me, myself, even though I have walked around for 48 years without this crucial soul element of mine missing from my emotional life, which has, by the way, allowed me to survive in all the crazy weirdness, Because if I'd been emotional as I am now when I was 15, don't think I might, have made it. I don't think. Because the sensitivity and yuck. And the powerlessness, no way. But that was like being self, being really there. There was a part of me that was there intellectually, and I suppose there was like this tiny little back garden path that passed through my heart area somehow, that I've always identified with, certainly consciously, and I thought that was it. I thought that was all there was to it. I didn't know that there was this whole world in here that could just make you fall to pieces and relate to, recognize things that people are saying and relate to people, hook, line, and sinker, and so on and so forth. I identified a lot of what I did. I identified with value and worth. So I decided a long time ago that anything could have value. It's like I'm a Leo. Everything has value for me in some way. And Leos, I think, don't consider it possible even for people to not have value. Issues around value are quite sensitive around Leos, because how can you not think of yourself as the king or queen of your life? You're supposed to be in charge here. You're supposed to be responsible. You're supposed to be able to carry all this. Just general, my type of Leo thoughts here as I'm bringing them to you. So there was a huge conflict on that level, very deeply buried between my husband and I, in terms of the certainty of this type of value that I had for my life, and that I have always seen and always felt that he had to apparently deny. That thing which was crucial and essential for me, he had to deny. And I didn't know why. Until 2017, so that is way over much later. And all this time in between we spent fighting for some type of, not with each other, with the world. And we had to go bankrupt. We worked our asses off every day of our lives. But work and value have everything to do with each other. It's like whether you accept what life can give you. And if you are a lost twin, a twin that feels left over in this world without that partner that was there at the very beginning, nothing can compare to that value. Nothing can come close ever to that value. How could I be to him? So I have always felt these things. I have felt these things, but I didn't know what to call them. And I only now am slowly approaching the realization, and that's what happened yesterday. I sort of just went with my brain, you just stuck everything together, like this is the pattern. Here you go. We'd been in this memory lane thing and talking about the past and talking about the way we used to just, ride on our bikes and talk about things. I used to always talk endlessly, just like I do now. Only there wasn't really a, backbone to the whole lot of it. It was general subjects and being interested in things. And I was always looking for a truth, like I've said before. And here I am now that I have found my truth with, with basically our link to our souls. That's my truth right there. And everything else stems from that. And in the lost twin effect, actually what's happening really is that the soul is predominant. The strength and the force of the soul cannot be denied. which is a really beautiful thing once you get around to finding a shape for yourself in your life for that. And that's really hard. It's really hard. And it means that the truth has to come out in all sorts of ways, all our ideas about powerlessness, and this is something I can't do anything about, all that type of stuff. You have to confront together. And okay, so that's what I'm doing. That's what we are doing. Husband and I are in this together, and I'm already 50 minutes in. I'm going to leave it here and now because I think 50 minutes is enough. Thank you so much for watching. I will dig out the other episodes that I did on the lost twin situation, because there will be a bit more explanation about how that really works and how we got to that knowledge and all that. So you may want to take a look at that if you feel up to that stuff, okay? Thank you so much again, and see you soon, okay? Bye-bye.